Welcome to Badger Talks Quick Picks, which brings exciting happenings, resources, and talent from your UW flagship campus to the people of Wisconsin and beyond, demonstrating the power of the Wisconsin idea, one connection at a time.
Hello, welcome to today's Badger Talk. My name is Pelin Kesebir and I study the psychology of happiness. And today I want to share with you some tips for cultivating happiness. Now, those of us who study happiness think of it as a skill that can be cultivated. A skill just like playing a musical instrument, speaking a foreign language, or painting. It is true that some of us are born with a greater talent for happiness, just like some of us are born with a greater talent for painting or for music. But at the same time, there are things that we can all learn and do that would help us become happier, that would get us closer to our maximum potential for happiness. Now, a lot of those things have to do with increasing our capacity for positive emotions. Positive emotions such as love, joy, gratitude, awe, or serenity. All of these are the building blocks of happiness. You cannot imagine a person who is happy yet doesn't experience an abundance of these emotions. So because of that, when we talk about cultivating the skill of happiness, most of the time what we are talking about is cultivating the habits of the heart, the mind, and the body that will allow us to experience those emotions more frequently. Now, let me start then with my first tip for how we can cultivate those habits. And the first one is actually about negative emotions. Now, we have said that for happiness, we want to experience an abundance of positive emotions, but that doesn't mean that we are not going to be experiencing negative emotions. This is not how we think of happiness, grinning 24/7, being cheerful all the time. No, happiness is not about erasing all negative emotions from our lives. Happiness also includes unhappiness. Now, for one, we do want to experience negative emotions because negative emotions are functional, they are necessary. We want to be able to feel fear, for example, when we encounter something truly dangerous. Or we want to experience a sense of guilt when we do something that hurt somebody. Now, we want to experience these emotions, but we will experience them whether we want it or not. Because negative emotions are not only necessary, but they are also unavoidable. Life, the way it is constituted, it is hard. It includes lots of hardships. We experience illness, loss, death. All of these things necessarily make life hard, and we cannot avoid those. So we do not want to invite negative emotions, and we do not want to linger in them when they inescapably arrive. But what we want to do is to be at peace with them, to be at peace with their existence. As this old poem says, into each life some rain must fall, some days must be dark and dreary. We have to accept this fact, we have to even accept this fact that some days, even some seasons will be really difficult, and resisting negative emotions too much is futile, and it will actually take away from our happiness. So we do not want to go to war with our negative emotions. We want to experience them. We want to respect their right to exist. To the extent that they are functional, we want to be okay with them. Okay, so that was my first tip, and now let's move on to my second tip, which has to do with our attention. Now, our attention is like the spotlight of our mind, and wherever we turn the spotlight determines our reality. So that means that where we put our attention has a direct bearing on our emotions. We know that happier people have a tendency to focus more on what is positive and what is helpful, whereas with people who are, for example, depressed or anxious, unhappier people, their attention tends to go more to the negative, and it also tends to stay there for a longer time. So all of this means that if we want to enhance our happiness, we want to train our attention. We want to train our attention to orient itself more to the good around us. Now, one way to do that is by practicing to appreciate the ordinary in our lives. Appreciating the small moments, like when you get up in the morning, maybe drink a cup of tea or coffee, maybe you enjoy some nice music under a blanket, or when you sit down to work, like really the little moments that make up life. Once we learn to savor them, that will have an outsized impact on our happiness, because that is what life consists of, right? Another way to practice turning our attention to the positive is by cultivating gratitude, practicing gratitude. Gratitude as a practice and as a personality trait has been robustly linked to happiness. That is because gratitude is all about focusing our attention on what is good. So it is the ultimate positive emotion. And when we practice gratitude, we train our brain to scan the environment for the positive. One gratitude practice that I do, for example, is before I go to bed every night, I try to think about 3 good things that happened to me that day. And oftentimes they are small things, not big things, but still it has the power to put me in a really good mood and make me feel grateful for my life. And that is not only good for my happiness, but also good for my sleep. So that was our second tip for happiness. Now let's move on to the third tip, which is a little bit related, and that is about interpreting the things in a positive way, interpreting the things that happen to us, interpreting the events in our lives in a more positive way. Now, as illustrated by this sweet cartoon, we see the world not as it is, but as we are. All of us have lenses in our eyes that show us the world in a particular way. Now, we tend to think that the way we perceive things, the way we interpret the things that happen to us, for example, is the only way to perceive those events, to interpret them, but that is not true, right? I'd like to show you an image. Please take a look at this image. What do you see? I believe many of you would see the word good there, and maybe some of you have also seen the word evil. When you focus on the white spaces inside the black letters, you will see that it spells out evil. So just like in this ambiguous image, a lot of things can be interpreted from multiple equally valid ways, yet some of these are better. Some of these ways of interpreting are more conducive to happiness. And research suggests indeed that happy people, they tend to interpret the things that happen to them, such as a breakup, maybe a failure at work, any frustration that they encounter in life, they have a tendency to interpret those events from a more positive, more constructive perspective. And how do they do that? They do that by using certain techniques, mental techniques, such as looking for the silver lining, or trying to identify the door that has opened as the result of the door that has closed. Or maybe just thinking about how things could have been worse, but they haven't. So all of these are little things that can help us to interpret the world in a more charitable way. And again, those are things that we can practice. We can always remember that there are ways of looking at the world that are slightly more charitable, slightly more helpful to us. Of course, we want to do all of that without divorcing ourselves from reality. Realistic but optimistic, that's the way to be. Okay, so that was my third tip, and how about my fourth tip? The fourth tip is about focusing more outward than focusing on ourselves. Now, this really is about the idea that too much self-focus, self-absorption, that is catastrophic for our happiness. We know that focusing too much on ourselves is associated with a host of negative emotions, such as anxiety, sadness, shame, also a lot of psychological disorders, such as social anxiety disorder or narcissism or even paranoia. Right? So what we know is that happy people, of course, they do not neglect their own well-being. This is not what it means. But what they have is they have an outward focus. So they are engaged with their friends, they focus on their relationships, they have hobbies, they are interested in arts, for example, they spend time in nature, they connect to nature, or they contribute to the well-being of others, they are engaged in their community. So the whole idea is that we do not want to focus on ourselves too much. Instead, we want to engage in activities that allow us to transcend ourselves. And then my fifth and final tip is maybe a bit basic, but it is fundamental. It is crucial for our happiness that we take good care of our bodies. Our minds and our bodies are not separate systems. They are parts of the same system, and whatever we do that is good for our body is also good for our mind. Whatever we do that is good for our mind is also good for our body. Now, that's why if you don't know where to start with your happiness journey, start here. Start here, because it is gonna allow you to implement all the other tips that we have talked about. If you consume lots of fruits and vegetables, if you get good enough regular sleep, if you move your body frequently, then that will inevitably put your mind to a better place where you can, for example, focus on the good around you or interpret things from a more positive perspective more easily. Those were our 5 tips, and this is what we have learned in the small amount of time we have had today. Thank you so much for listening to me. I hope you have learned something from this talk that you will take and implement in your own life. Have a good day and see you at another Badger Talk.